this is the panel that explores the implications of AI for good, solving social problems, and in the world of government. And we've got a great group of people here today from three sectors. Artur is can really speak about the frameworks around AI, and you've done some very interesting work on the cultural implications of language and how when we train things in one language, we're almost emasculating or changing the nature of culture on Earth. So kind of a great framework view. And then we have Jen, and you're doing great work in the nonprofit arena in which people are asking, how can we apply these things and make a difference? Very similar to what we're asking in a city like San Francisco. Where can this help in governance itself and in efficiency? And then we're going to hear from Nooshin in the private sector, applying this stuff to energy. I'll just kick this off by pointing out that San Francisco, of course, or the Bay Area is the leader in AI. We're also the leader in worrying about AI. If you think about what went on in the last year, we became kind of the community that was the most concerned with AI safety. We kind of had enormous agenda within organizations, people leaving and coming in because of the nature of the change of those organizations. The Center for Humane Technology was born here. So in a way, we were the closest to scaring ourselves about the implications. And we're probably also the leader in the community of people who are very thoughtfully thinking about how to apply these to social enterprises, both because we have a lot of technical expertise and the Bay Area has been an activist community that has a lot of social enterprises. So we have a full stack approach to the problem and the worrying about it. Oftentimes when you talk about AI and government, you talk about regulation. I think there's something like 80 AI regulation bills heading towards the governor, although he vetoed one last week, so maybe it's 79 now. So we're less going to be concerned with what we don't want to do on this panel, and more about what actually can be done. Although very significantly, there was an effort towards that Scott Wiener led, and then that got vetoed the other day. So that conversation will certainly continue. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the application of these emerging technologies to cities and to city governance. And kind of here's the framework for it. As we went through the pandemic, we almost synchronized American cities on a set of problems. All at once, housing became expensive everywhere. We've already heard how it's expensive here, but then the people who got to work from home moved to less expensive parts of the country, and now they're getting expensive. America basically has a several million home deficit, and you know this because you have a progressive presidential candidate, and her mantra is build, baby, build, and her opponent is a builder who has his own ideas about building. So it's kind of the top national thing. So we have those problems together with the problems of what do we do about our downtowns coming all at once. And at the same time, we have powerful new tools, these set of AI tools. And the real question is, can these be uniquely transformational for our cities in a way that tech hasn't been? This story really goes back to about 2007 or so. That's the year that cities opened their data, right? We have the transportation data, the health data, we could see food deserts, we could understand how to monitor the police. IBM announced smart cities then. So we've had about 20 years of, we can use this stuff for kind of operational management, but we still have as much bureaucracy as ever. So we've had these two things at once. And what I'd like to suggest is that these technologies may make very significant difference. A lot of what passes for AI in cities now is kind of smart cities with a little bit of AI. A good example is California has this wildfire detection system in which the cameras that are out there are a couple hundred times more sensitive and can catch fires super early on. Or you may have noticed that like all of the buses can figure out if your car is worthy of getting a ticket just now. So there's technology that can do that. But also, what is government if not a whole bunch of language? And so it can actually be used to do things like help write legislation or look at the city charter. Tomorrow afternoon at NTT, they'll be demoing an application that takes the city charter, which is very complex, very long, lots of amendments, turns it into English, lets you talk to it, and the city attorney's office is coming over because can computational law help speed things up? We'll be announcing very quickly
We'll get the speakers.
Good. So I'll just finish up and say we'll be announcing very quickly in San Francisco. The City Science Lab San Francisco that will apply these to things like housing problems and such. So there's a very rich panoply of solutions that can be applied just to the civic domain. Uh, Before we get to that, Artur, let's turn to you. I'm very interested in how you look at frameworks here. As I said, you've written a lot about both the fact that AIs are very English oriented, but you've also written about other constraints built into the technology that may help frame the conversation.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. I think we should have more discussions like this, and that's the whole reason for AI to even exist, to improve our lives, right? So we should center the discussion about how we can use these technology for good, and to be really mindful about what we're putting in these systems, because most often people refer to this phrase like garbage in, garbage out, right? But what we're seeing right now in the AI space, that there's no garbage out nowadays. It's actually super, super impressive. So it works, but we're kind of forgetting the part of what we're putting in, because we're just relying on this giant scraping machine, the big tech absorbing everything out there. And I mean it. Everything that exists on the internet is already there. Whether you gave your consent or not, it's there. And that brings up a whole different, plethora of ethical discussions. But that's a very important point. What are we putting into these systems so we can expect how they actually behave? Because when we're talking about improvement of the government, the question is it enough to just digest all of the, city data, all of the legislation data for the system to orient itself in the complex reality of the human to machine to government to system types of situations? I'm not sure yet.
Would you address that problem by changing the nature of the underlying models or trying to embody that, for example, with better understandings of how government interactions work or what consumers want? Like if you were to be an architect on that, where would you guide people?
Um, I mean, the question is, can AI help solve bureaucracy? Right?
Yeah.
Is that a realistic expectation? I think for us, we have to be mindful of the fact that AI is a representation of a humanity in a way. It's just a statistical, theoretical representation of our behaviors, the language, and all of the things that we encode through language. And that's why the culture is super important. That's why the diversity of the thought is super important. Because we also tend to forget that the reason why Silicon Valley is so amazing, and the previous speaker was talking about this, people from all over the world come here, and what they bring, they're not bringing English. They're bringing the diversity of thought, the diversity of language, the diversity of thinking about problems differently, and their whole experience. Be it living, growing up in a rural India or Ukraine or anywhere else in Africa or South America. And I believe, even when you observe how people work in the systems, all of these things, they influence the systems, right? And if we rely only on the English data and all of that data, can we actually represent the diversity of thought and problem solving?
As you bring up diversity, it kind of makes the perfect point that our ecosystem works because we're diverse, and you're talking about how data can be constrained. Are you optimistic about techniques like collective intelligence, right? Collective intelligence in AI seeks to try to get the input from lots of people, because in government processes, we frequently have, 4 people show up and testify for something, and yet there's a lot of collective intelligence. And that same technologies might help us make decisions and agree in a manner more effective than perhaps the way we do with lobbying and traditional mechanisms.
I would, always take a side of collective human intelligence that a super AGI intelligence.
Yeah.
Here in Silicon Valley, we do have this cult, the belief. Actually, it's a dichotomy.
Yeah,
On
we
one
do.
side, you have a cult of AGI. The utopian super intelligence will come and save us all. And on the other side, you have doomsayers that say, hey, it's going to kill us all, Skynet, Terminator, and all of it. But in between, there's a lack of conversation in between, where AI actually amplifies that collective intelligence aspect and helps bring up, basically the capacity
Yeah.
for us to exercise more of that. So I'm super excited about collective intelligence being amplified by technology.
And that's the conversation we're having today, which brings us to Jen. You're doing great work with nonprofits, and it's fascinating to see that you've been running workshops with organizations that do great work, and then they're like, we're new to this. Will it help us? Will it hurt us? And what do we do? So kind of share us your work in that space.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you so much for inviting me, Martin. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. We've been working with a number of nonprofits from what is generative AI, how do I work this, what tools do I use, to the point where now they're imagining solutions for themselves, and we're helping them build those solutions either through outside companies and public-private partnerships, or through programs like breakthroughtech.org. I'll say that again in case you didn't catch that. Breakthroughtech.org is a really wonderful model of a program in which emerging talent from Cal States like mine, go Cal States, I think Ken had mentioned, I'm also a Cal State graduate, are giving AI ML curriculum to bachelor degree students to be able to provide AI solutions for nonprofits and small businesses. And these students are women, they're women of color, they're non-binary students who otherwise wouldn't have this opportunity because there is such a gap in this area. And so one of the things I'm finding with nonprofits is if you teach nonprofit staff, executive directors, et cetera, how the current capabilities, of course, the risks and harms, but the current capabilities, they're able to start to imagine what they can do, and they are empowered in ways that we really need them to be empowered because of the work that they're doing.
Can you walk us through some of the things that you and your clients have learned? Like now they imagine stuff. So give us a few examples of some nonprofits that have come up with, here's something new, and maybe an example of things that maybe helps or automates stuff and things that might be transformational.
Yes, great question. And which should I share? There's many, and I'll start with the institutional level. And one thing I want to frame this around is it's not taking anyone's jobs. It's actually helping them in work that they have on their list of to-dos that they've been dying to get to. But if they do, they'll burn themselves out, type of thing. So the first I want to give you an example of is an unnamed fire department. They have a number of training bulletins that have been outdated for 20 years. And of course, having training bulletins that are updated is vital for the health of the city. And so usually with the regular process, they get 3 training bulletins done by 3 chiefs and their team a year. And there are numerous, as you can imagine, training bulletins that need to be done. On this scale, it would take 10 years for them to update these training bulletins, and then you can imagine by then they're going to need more updating at that point. And so now, with the help of ChatGPT, they're able to, and other AI tools, they're able to streamline this process much faster. That's one large example. Another example would be an internal chatbot for Bowery Residents Committee. They have a 24/7 outfit of staff that have questions for the human resources staff 9 to 5. But for their graveyard shift staff, they're not able to access those staff in the morning. And so with an internal chatbot, they're able to ask questions about benefits and the like through natural language and natural language processing tools.
New Jersey did an interesting implementation. When people are looking for work, say you might want to be in the trades, you want to be a plumber, you'll find some trade school. And the trade school could be $3,000 or $20,000. Because New Jersey had access to all this information and your tax returns, they were able to put this together and say, well, the people who went to the $2,000 trade school were making $70,000 a year, but somehow the people who went to the expensive one were making less, right? So they were able to aggregate data, anonymize it, and provide better counseling, right? And I think we'll see lots of this harvesting of things, and there are many other examples. There was we had a case here in San Francisco. We did a hackathon last year that there was a guy. He was a machine vision guy, and he liked drones. He liked to fly drones. And the other thing was he hated garbage. And he lived in the Bayview, and people dumped stuff. So he flew drones to find the garbage in the Bayview. And then he wrote a machine vision algorithm that could specifically find the garbage, locate it, and put in some safety stuff so we didn't see people's faces, and kept sending it to 311, to the Public Works Department. And he found 700 pieces of garbage, and they were all gone in 14 days. And then he took a vacation, and it came back, and he sent it off again. So he called them up and said, how come I'm the only one that gets you to clean up the garbage? And they said to him, how else would we know? You're the guy with the panopticon that can see it all. We have to wait for it to get reported, and then we have to go pick it up in whatever route we're told. You see it all at once, and we can do a routing algorithm. So that was another interesting example. The biggest issue there was procurement. The city is not set up to buy brand new things like this. So that's one of the bookmarks we have to put in place.
If you don't mind, there's
Yeah.
one more I want to share.
Go
that
ahead.
I think is
Yeah.
going to be really valuable for nonprofits and foundations and
Yeah.
grantors. Through Goldhirsch Foundation, we're developing a chatbot that will help grant application submitters to understand what Goldhirsch Foundation wants in their grantees
Oh, yeah.
and help them through the application process, which usually it's a us against them type of situation when, as many of us know what it's like when you're applying for grants. You feel like it's you versus this big entity. But if this big entity is helping you and guiding you through the process, then you feel much more supported, and you understand a bit more of how to navigate such a big challenge. And coming from someone who's, I'm a newbie in the nonprofit space. I've only founded Employ California 4 years ago. And so there was a lot I didn't know, especially in the grant application space. So there's another really cool application.
We may be entering the golden age of people sending grant applications in automatically because it'll be so easy. So that'll be interesting to watch. Nooshin, your firm does very interesting work helping people capture methane and therefore reduce their carbon footprint and increase efficiency. And you've also been using AI, as I understand it, to actually help your customers teach themselves the advantage here. So kind of what was your journey to both create this and now add this kind of intelligence that almost helps customers figure things out and does the education?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Nooshin Behroyan with PAXON Energy. I founded my company about 8 years ago. By trade, I'm an environmental engineer, civil engineer. And at the time when I was consulting, and my clients are Fortune 100s, the legacy oil and gas, the utilities, the government, defense, and really understanding back when net zero wasn't a term, back when methane emissions wasn't on anybody's radar, I had this discussion with California utility executives that at one point, because methane is 80 times worse than CO2 as a player in its first 2 decades in the atmosphere, at the level in which we put methane into the atmosphere from the reported side is about 145 billion tons globally. And methane is the main component of natural gas. So imagine if we had an ability to eliminate this level of emissions, the cost of energy, the shortages of energy that we're dealing with in Europe because of the geopolitical situations that are happening will all be answered just if we fixed our infrastructure. And when you fast forward, I mean, please don't kid yourself. Climate change is real. We deal with wildfires. Now, I have close friends whose family has lost their homes in Tampa area. So it is an immediate aspect. And for a lot of us that are in California, do you not want to see your bill reduced on the PG&E side? Yes, PG&E is a client. So when I founded the company, we physically do the work for our clients, and we bring in the technologies in the field that recovers the emissions. And one thing when I started working with international players, let's say like one of the countries we started working with, they were like, well, we want to do something about emissions. And they brought us in, and that was country of Egypt. I learned quickly that they're not willing to share their data with us. I mean, if you're not sharing your data, how am I going to be able? It's like going to a doctor, but not showing up to the doctor and expecting somehow like being diagnosed. So it was at that time that I implemented AI into our company. What I learned founding a company in California is the gravity of the Bay Area region. When I needed to implement AI, I didn't look at it as who's going to lose their job. I looked at it from a perspective of how can we bring efficiency, how can we do this in a more cohesive way, and just having the contact and being a California company, it wasn't that hard. I literally went into my contacts and I found a new startup and I say, hey, can you build this? And then I'm going to take you to the wildfire side and can you build that? And it happened like this. So when the Office of the Economics here and the workforce, when they talk about Bay Area has this ability and we're leading the AI side of it, we truly are. And it's a matter of how do we leverage it?
Couple of points on that. When you gave the example of adding AI so customers could work with their own data, that's actually an important AI for good point, right? People want data autonomy. There's a lot of concern that if I'm using ChatGPT or another system, what if my data ends up there and is captured? And so you actually had a foreign customer that said, we don't want to ship all our data over to the United States. Let us keep it local. And of course, Apple's whole AI strategy is push it to the edge, keep it local. That's a very big kind of part of what's going on in the open source world. And that became kind of a key way for you to work internationally.
Yes, and I think in every sector is about education aspect of it is so important.
Yep.
When I first started talking about methane and methane recovery, I would have customers saying, you sound stupid, right? So because if you're not well educated about it, there's a level of fear. Why should I try it?
Yeah.
The regulation says I should just vent and everybody does it. So why
Yeah.
should I be any different?
I think that relates to another thing, and it also relates to something that Artur we brought up earlier, which is if you're trying to bust bureaucracy or change behaviors, getting people to understand what's going on and get educated is a key thing. This is certainly a case in housing. If someone says we're going to put housing in your neighborhood, your immediate reaction is something bad could happen. You'd love to see it visualized. You'd love to see it traded off. It's an interesting point that our kids go home at night with more supercomputer power to visualize worlds and what they might be like, but they're working with fake worlds that are wonderful. But we haven't actually given them their city and their world to go play with. And what you're describing in self-educating is very similar to some of the work that we're trying to do with cities. So I'm wondering, if you've got thoughts on how we can apply this great simulation technology that we have to understanding and kind of moving people forward on these kind of social solutions.
Yeah, so I'm actually excited about a lot of the work that Jen is involved with, because I truly believe that we as a society, we're actually not ready for what's coming.
Yeah.
And as Jen mentioned, it's not about, basically stealing jobs, right? Everywhere I go that is not a technical event, people are like, oh, so you're the guy stealing our jobs. And I'm like, I guess that is happening in a way, but that's not the point. The reality of the power of AI is that it can amplify the human capabilities, except we're not really training the workforce to work with it. I give an example. Like, let's imagine there's a school, there's 100 teachers there that do work right now. And then AI comes in and all of a sudden kids can be basically taught with LLMs. That's already happening, by the way. In 5-10 years, that's going to be large scale. So all of a sudden, you don't need those 100 teachers. You only need 10 because majority of the mundane work is done by AI. But the existential question is, what do you do with the 90 teachers? The traditional approach that we see here in Silicon Valley is layoffs, right? Let's just cut the workforce and be efficient. But this story is not really about the efficiency. This story is about inventing new modes of engagement, because you can basically train those teachers to give more in-depth education or different kind of education that we can basically accelerate with the usage of AI. So I think we're too focused on hey, AI will steal our jobs, and not having enough attention to those kind of simulated experiences so that these teachers can actually understand how AI works, have an idea of some novel experiences that they can enable to their audience, and also the infrastructure that both government and federal government and local government can encourage to be created. And I'm talking about basically, regulation of AI, not through the restriction, but through enablement. through actually giving resources and grants to innovate on the modes of engagement. So that's what I think.
And this is so leading edge. You know, it was just a year ago that BCG did the seminal research that was asking what went on with AI and employment. And what they learned was when you had a new employee that wasn't that skilled, but if there was AI that understood that business process, they would come up to speed really quickly. It was an equalizer. You might have been a long-term employee and normally you'd mentor the new person for a long time, but they came up to speed very quickly because the AI augmented them, right? So we know its ability to augment capacity is great, but you're pointing out we have to figure out these are all the experiments people have to do to kind of apply it and figure this stuff out.
Yeah, because also when we talk about AI, the conversation really points into efficiency, right? Efficiency of compute, efficiency of data, efficiency of the workforce. But like we're entering this whole, interesting new world where it's not really about efficiency. When people talk about like post-abundance society and like super intelligence and all of that, like we should have more conversation about novel experiences, not efficient experiences.
And in many ways, this is, I think, the trajectory of what's going on in cities. Smart cities were very efficient stuff. How do you drive us towards flourishing cities? And some new research is coming out from BCG next week. We'll actually look at enterprise deployments, and they kind of go into three buckets. One is, okay, it made things more efficient. We did the note-taking. Another is we actually came up with completely new business processes. And the other is we saw entirely new lines of business, right? We saw new ways of doing things. And so that's where we get to stretch ourselves. There's an example we're working on in San Francisco to reimagine the nature of zoning. What if zoning for housing wasn't static, but it was dynamic? It understood the community's needs and it kind of changed it. It may have put in benefits, so you start negotiating benefits and you start getting an equilibrium, a housing equilibrium, which would be an interesting new idea. Hey, as we wrap up, I'd love to hear kind of from each of you your thoughts, like if we go out 5 years, on what you might see as really interesting transformational things or stuff to keep our eye on in your respective sectors that may be the surprising things that when we look back on, we realize that was the real application here that actually both employed people and did something different. Jen, we could start with you because I think you're seeing lots of data from lots of people.
Thank you. In a past life, I was a professor for 16 years. And so when I discovered ChatGPT, I had to learn it to teach others. That was like the automatic thing to do. And I think that having upskilling programs and train the trainer type of programs is what we need right now to get to the place we want to be in 5 years. When I go into different spots to train, whether it be education, nonprofits, small businesses in underrepresented areas, I feel like I'm Mary Poppins, but Maria Poppins coming in, blessing them. Off I go with my umbrella. But I want to always stay longer. I will always want to be there for a whole month with them to train them and get them up to speed. And so I think what local government can do, what private and public partnerships can do, because we do need funding for this. And so we could create, to get to this place in 5 years, we should create train the trainer programs so that all of us can be upskilled and augment the various ideas and get those back burner projects done that we've been wanting to get to for a long time, which would get us to the place we want to be in those 5 years.
Of all the various people you've worked with, like what's one or two ideas that you looked at and it kind of blew your mind? Like if that happened, people would be amazed.
They haven't happened yet. They haven't happened yet because of lack of funding. Yeah. And so, and that's been my big call to action for all of us is to find programs that are doing train the trainer type of programs and to see how you can help in that regard. That's really important.
And Nooshin, you're in this enormous infrastructure arena, and you're almost at the beginning of this path with what you've begun to learn on how you apply machine intelligence and augmentation. Kind of how do you see things going and what might be looking at broadly in infrastructure and in your world in the next few years?
Yeah, I think that's a great question in a sense that energy industry is experiencing what the tech world experienced in the early 90s and 2000 with all the commitments that are being made, the changes like the footprints being reached by 2035. By 2050. And I look at countries, I look at departments in this mindset of there are innovators, there are slow movers, and they're non-movers. And just so you know, if you think America is in the category of innovators when it comes to energy, you're wrong. We're actually in the category of slow movers, just because we are the top 3 emitter when it comes to, from the energy standpoint, we're the top 3 countries in the world. So that puts us in a slow mover. So what do you think is going to happen in 5 years? As interesting as it is, the industry is now ready to implement new technologies and change, and procurement is, I mean, you brought that topic up, is that it is an important topic because it takes such a long time for them to adopt new companies and so forth. And then the non-movers are like China's and India's of the world. And innovators, it would be like a Germany. But what I want to leave everybody in this room, you're here, whether you're running a department, whether you're just an individual contributor, not everybody has to be a founder and having a company that leads a sector. It's really, you're empowered to think about, where does my department or where does my company or organization fall within these 3 categories. Yep. Whether it's technology driven, whether it's footprint driven, or it's social and economical footprint. So thinking about that, and I think Simon Sinek, he's a renowned author, he put it really, really well. Maybe this talk is from maybe 10 years ago. He said, similar stuff where some people are ahead of their age and they're so excited when the new phone was coming out. They would be the people who would just adopt it immediately. And then there are people that slowly change their phones. And then the ones that are changing from flip phones to the touchscreen phones only did it because they basically the other phones were no longer available. So I want to turn it back to the audience. Think about where you stand. How do you want to adopt? We all, at least within the regions that we live in this country, we have an ability to make a difference. And think about what it doesn't just have to be profitable. It has to have the social environmental impact.
I wanted to add that in the infrastructure world, in addition to generative AI, there's generative design. So systems that understand themselves, heal themselves. There's a whole field of critical infrastructure, generative design for critical infrastructure, that can make our systems and our infrastructure systems safer and help speed up their own design. Artur, as we wrap up, what is the state you would love us to be in 5 years, and what will we have done differently?
I actually was planning to answer your first question.
Answer my first question.
Yeah, so on the use cases that we're not yet thinking about. And I would encourage you to think about the knowledge on the edges. And what I mean by that is that AI is a statistical machine. And pretty much the more it sees, the more it learns. But there's so much knowledge on the edges that exists in our humanity and our collective intelligence that is simply not getting there. One of the projects that we're running for AI for Good initiatives is actually working with Yanomami tribe deep in Brazil. And they have a lot of very unique knowledge about plant medicine and all kinds of potential healthcare revelations that are simply not getting anywhere near, AGI and the super intelligences. So instead of focusing on creating the echo chamber of all the knowledge that we keep circulating in our, society, how about we tap into that edge knowledge? So that's, I think, what people are not thinking enough. And I would encourage everyone to actually, take on initiatives like that, because that's what makes it happen.
That is terrific. And now back to our moderator.
Thank you, panelists.